The basic aspect has changed a lot over the course of Marvel Champions. In this video, I want to cover how basic has changed and also what caused it to be this way, and then what that means for the card pool and deck building. These are the only cards that came in the core box that were basic. You can see that you have your 3 double resources, Strength, Genius, and Energy. These are essential for your economy. You need them in almost every deck you play because they increase your deck's power so much. Avengers Mansion and Helicarrier were also staples at this point in the game, where basically every single deck you had included both of them because they were the only economy supports that you had access to in Basic. Avengers Mansion let any player draw a card. Helicarrier reduced the cost of the next card a player plays in a phase by 1. Avengers Mansion, Helicarrier, and the double resources are still very good to this day, but you'll notice a drop in power when we talk about upgrades and events here. So Tenacity is a 2-cost card that you put onto the table and then you can ready your hero, but you can't just ready your hero off that 2-cost card. You have to spend a physical and discard it to do that. So you won't even get to keep readying your hero. It's a one-time use that's going to cost 4 effective resources to get 1 ready out of your hero. You can see that that's not that enticing of a card. Then if we go look at the events, you see Emergency, 0 cost, interrupt, thwart when the villain schemes, reduce the amount of threat placed on the scheme by 1. So it's 1 effective resource to prevent 1 scheme. Warning, 1 effective resource to reduce the damage you take by 1. So not great. I think Emergency is a bit better than a warning, but these are not very good. And then 2-cost Haymaker, deal 3 damage to an enemy. Really simple, not that much damage, but simple and useful. First Aid, heal 2 damage from any character. This card I think is actually pretty good. You get to heal 2 damage from a hero when you need it, so you don't necessarily have to flip to Alter Ego and worry about the scheme. But more importantly, it just says from any character, so you can heal up your allies, which is going to be the best use for First Aid, in my opinion. And then we move on to the allies that came in the core box. Nick Fury is a staple, still a staple. One of the best cards in the entire game, and came in the core box. So you get to, after Nick enters play, you get to remove 2 threat from scheme, draw 3 cards, or deal 4 damage to an enemy. Most of the time, you'll be drawing 3 cards, thwarting or attacking with Nick, and then using him as a blocker, which is a lot of value. So he's 5 effective resources, but then you draw 3 cards. So really, he's only like 2 effective resources. And then for those 2 effective resources, you get 2 thwart or 2 attack, which is already on par with Emergency and Warning, but except it's more versatile than that. And then also he can block on top of that. So he clearly outclasses every other card in Basic at this point in the game. And then still, there's not really any allies that are better than Nick Fury. Some can situationally be better, but Nick Fury is a staple card that can be put into any deck you build, almost any deck you build at all, and then you can feel good about it. Mockingbird is not quite as good as Nick Fury, but also is incredibly powerful. 4 effective resources, 3 cost, and then she leaves your hand as well, so 4 effective. After Mockingbird enters play, stun an enemy. So Mockingbird can come into play, stun the villain, thwart off the main scheme twice if you can afford it, and then block. So it's 4 effective resource for 2 blocked activations and 2 thwart. That's amazing. So you can see a clear discrepancy in here from just the core box's original design of the Energy, Genius, Strength, Avengers Mansion, Helicarrier are all helping your economy and are extremely powerful. The allies, Nick Fury and Mockingbird, extremely powerful. And then you probably want to look somewhere else for your events and your upgrades. So now let's discuss the original intent of Basic. I think these cards really help to illustrate the point. If you look at Haymaker, a 2-cost, deal 3 damage to an enemy. Go to the aggression aspect, you get Relentless Assault. It's also 2-cost. Deal 5 damage to a minion, and if you paid for this card using a physical, this attack gains overkill. So you can see it's 2 more damage than Haymaker. It has a requirement of needing a physical resource, but that's not really that hard to do. It's really rare that you'll get Relentless Assault and then not be able to use the physical. The really only downside of Relentless Assault is that you can't use it to attack the villain. You have to use it to attack a minion. So if there's not a minion out, then it's not that good. But if you also think about the core box, Claw and Ultron, there's basically always minions out. Also, not ever really a dead card in your hand. So you can think of it as pretty much just 2 more damage than Haymaker with Overkill for the same cost. So it's much better than Haymaker in most situations. Supersonic Punch, on the other hand, is a hero card. It's Iron Man's card that says deal 4 damage to an enemy, but if you have the aerial trait, which Iron Man will almost always have the aerial trait by the time he's thinking about playing this card, you do 8 damage. So you can see it jumps from 3 damage to 5 damage to 8 damage, showing that basic is going to be the least efficient card. Aspects are going to be the next most efficient card, and then your hero cards will be your best cards. The power level is intentionally designed such that hero cards are the best, and then aspect, and then basic, at least for events. So now we have to discuss how this affects your deck building. If you think about Haymaker again, I just picked this one because it's such a simple and clear example. You probably don't want to include this in aggression deck because you have Relentless Assault and Uppercut, which are both going to be better cards than Haymaker for you. But if you're not playing aggression, you do not have access to Uppercut or Relentless Assault. And if you look at the Justice cards that came in the core box, there isn't a single attack event in the entire aspect. So suddenly, if you want to play Justice, you're grabbing Justice because you want to thwart. You can't find ways to do damage in Justice other than just having Daredevil and Jessica Jones as allies. So the damage in Justice is basically non-existent. But so then Haymaker actually fulfills a purpose to where if you pick Justice, you're going to be weaker on damage, you'll be able to control the threat, and then Haymaker can fill in that gap of damage to help you deal with minions. And Haymaker is great at dealing with minions. 2 costs to get rid of a minion is pretty good. And at this point in the game too, the minions weren't as powerful as you're seeing at this point in the game. So 3 damage is enough to take out basically every minion in the game at that point. I think with the exception of like Radioactive Man had 7 health, but most minions between Haymaker and a basic attack, you can just take them out with a Haymaker and it wasn't an issue. So from this, we can see that basic was intended in the core box to fill in the gaps of whatever aspect you choose with upgrades and events. But then the resources, supports, and allies in basic were not meant to do that. They were meant to be good on their own and represent cards that are there to help every hero, regardless of what aspect or trait you're using. Now, if we fast forward to the current state in 2024, 5 years after the game came out, allies still are extremely strong in basic. There's not that power jump that you see with events to where the aspect events are better than the basic events. Aspect allies are often more specific to the purpose of the aspect than basic allies, but they're not just flat out better like the events are. So Ironheart is a great example, a 2-cost ally that has 1 thwart, 1 attack, and then you get to draw a card when you play Ironheart. So that means that Ironheart's 3 effective resources becomes 2, and then you get to thwart 1, attack for 1, and then block. It's really solid. There's a lot of really versatile allies in basic. Another one that comes to mind is the Miles Morales basic ally, who is a 1/2, 1 thwart, 2 attack, 3 health, and then when he enters play, you can choose to add +2 to any stat. So for 3 cost, you get 3 thwart, 4 damage, or 4 damage on the very first turn. That's amazing, extremely versatile, and then also you can keep him around for another activation and then a block. And then if we look at some more modern supports, we can look at the Web of Life and Destiny. Ignore this card's resource cost if your identity has the Web Warrior trait. Response: after a Web Warrior ally leaves play, choose a player. That player draws a card. So now suddenly, if you're playing a Web Warrior character, this support is free. You don't have to pay anything to get it on the table. And then when you run all of those Web Warrior allies, when they leave play, you get to draw a card. That completely outclasses the analogous Avengers Mansion that lets you draw a card. And you'll notice that it's trait locked. Now, if we look at Utopia, it's a 2-cost support that says if each of your allies has the X-Men trait, increase your ally limit by 1. And then after an X-Men ally enters play, exhaust Utopia and ready an X-Men character. Now, if you think back to Tenacity, the 2-cost upgrade in basic, that you also have to spend a physical and then discard the card that lets you ready, the comparison is non-existent. Utopia has the additional bonus of increasing your ally limit by 1, and then it doesn't disappear. It sticks around and lets you ready any X-Men character. So that can be your hero, or it could be an ally. So if it's your hero, often you'll have like 3 of a stat that you'll get to do, which is really good, or you can ready up and then flip down and recover after activating on that same turn. Utopia and Web of Life and Destiny, in my opinion, are both in a different league of power compared to Avengers Mansion, Tenacity, and Helicarrier. This shift in power has fundamentally changed how deck building works. So I wanted to illustrate this with an example. So when you go to play a character, let's say we pick a random X-Men character, so Bishop's the first one here. Since the trait lock cards are so powerful, you'll want to start by adding those in and the double resources in general because of how powerful those are. Then, after the double resources, grab whatever supports you have access to that are really strong. So Utopia for the X-Men, and then the X-Jet that generates a wild resource. And then since we have Utopia, we want to add in allies. So we just switch over to basic, search X-Men, so we get all the allies. You notice, oh, Angel's a really good ally. Forge lets me search out my supports, that's really strong. Beak has really good thwarting. Professor X is an amazing card. Triage lets you heal, that's really strong. Colossus is very strong. Shadowcat blanks out events, that's really strong. Legion works really well with Bishop if you discard his resource. And then at this point, we already have so many X-Men allies, really strong supports, a good economy, that the aspect we choose is almost irrelevant when you do this. And since we have so many of these cards, we can go into the resources again, add in the power in all of us because of how powerful that card is when you have this many resources. And now we only have 10 slots left in our deck before we get up to 40 cards. And we haven't even had to consider what our aspect is. Now, Bishop really likes resources, so you might want to consider adding Digging Deep, but I don't want to go into that right now for the purposes of this video. We can also add in team building exercise because it will reduce the cost of all these X-Men cards. And then now we only have 9 deck slots left to get to 40 cards. This has fundamentally shifted how deck building works because once you add in all of these powerful trait locked cards that you have, and then the resources for economy, and these really strong basic allies, you're suddenly making a deck out of basic, and then choosing an aspect to fill in the gaps of basic or lean into whatever strengths you want, as opposed to picking an aspect that you want and then supplementing that aspect with basic. If you have a complete card collection, anytime you pick an X-Men character, after you add in the X-Men stuff that you want, like just the X-Men package, suddenly your aspect does not feel that impactful. And also, if you play a character like Magic, who has the X-Men and the Mystic trait, if you add in the Mystic stuff into this deck as well, suddenly you basically don't have any deck slots left. And if we zoom out a bit and just think about what does a deck need, it's generally going to come down to you want to use your hero cards because your hero cards are still going to be the best cards you have access to in most cases. You want to have cards that support your economy so that you can actually utilize your hero's kit. And then you want to have cards that can deal with what the villain's doing at the time, which is generally going to be you need to thwart, you need to do damage, and you need to survive. And basic allies fulfill all of those roles. Now the aspect is not necessary like it was with the core box. And if we just quickly go over everything that I think contributes to this, the first thing was when the core box was released, basic allies were never worse than aspect allies, and allies in general are the strongest card type. And then when you combine that tribal builds are going to be the most powerful builds for your hero often, and they often have a lot of basic allies to support that build, a significant portion of your power budget will now come from basic instead of the aspects. And the power in all of us existing incentivizes you further to do an all basic build. And having such an expanded card pool means there's going to be a lot of targets for it and a lot of allies and supports that can generically increase your hero's strength. That's about all I had to say for this video. I could go a lot further into this. I want to hear from all of you in the comments how your experience with this has been. Because again, I got to the game a little bit late, but I also did have a period where I didn't have that many cards. And when I was building a deck, it was very much I choose my hero, and then I choose my aspect, and then I choose what basic cards I want to add to fill in the gaps of that aspect. Whereas now, with almost every deck I build, I feel like I choose my hero, and then I add the basic cards that I want to have with that hero, and then I think about the aspect after that, which has been like a paradigm shift that I don't know if I really enjoy that much. I kind of like the original role that Basic had of filling in the gaps of your aspect and having cards like Haymaker actually be enticing to use. Whereas now there's just so many options that a lot of the cards like that are just simple and a little less efficient than your hero or aspect cards would be, just can't really justify a deck slot anymore. And I hope you enjoyed this video. If you liked it, make sure to leave a comment and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one. Stay zesty. See ya.